As we tread through this next part of our growth, the process through which we find solutions is going to be just as important as the solution itself, to ensure people feel like they are heard, listened to, and accounted for in the process. I think for me, what is important and what motivates me is how people within the system feel. I think, many of us have friends that have lamentations with, be it the system as a whole, or with particular policies that are being put through the system. And more often than not, the reaction is kind of resignation, kind of grudging acceptance of that just being the reality that we're living in. I hope that we can kind of push towards a path where that becomes the rarity, not the norm, where folks are actually willing to come forward, make their voices heard, and they actually see their voices echoed in various places, be it in parliament, be it in policy, and even if the outcome may not be what everyone universally likes in the moment, there's a sense that they are part of it, and there's an investment to continue to invest in it for the next issue and for the next issue. And I think that is how we build the right political compact to bring the country forward. We have to think about how policies not just are written, but how they are lived, how people actually experience them, which is why, for us, MPSs and house visits are the lifeblood of the party, because it allows us to really understand how these policies are lived by individuals, by Singaporeans, and be able to identify when sometimes the way it's written and how it's lived doesn't really correlate. It allows us to flag these issues through Parliament, through other channels, to be able to right-size it, to ensure that the intention meets the actual outcomes. When I was in consulting, I had the opportunity to work with some of the largest MNCs, billion-dollar companies that really dominated their industry and their space. And I think being able to work with some of the executives in these companies, there's so much vested interest, there's so much to lose. These companies are unwilling to actually make very big, innovative bets. And the culture kind of suffers as a consequence of that. Taking that experience, I think it's somewhat reflected in the way politics in Singapore is, right? Where there sometimes is a sense that there is that same rigidity of movement. This is kind of a consequence of the way the system is when you have such a dominant single-party system. This is just kind of a feature, not a bug of the system. And I think that's kind of why it's important for us to think about ways to kind of change the system a little bit and kind of knock it into a better equilibrium. I think resilience at its heart is about a system that is able to resist shocks to it. And when I think about companies, there's a concept sometimes that we talk about, which is the key person risk, which is the idea that you have too many keys of the company residing in one single individual, where if they leave or something happens to them, the entire company is going to collapse. When I think of the Singapore system, I see this problem kind of reflected in it, where it feels sometimes like a lot of our keys of government, policy, civil service, all reside in a single party in the same way. When you diffuse the risk and allow more folks with an understanding of how to actually run government, run policy, and that will make Singapore better off, more resilient, structurally stronger to resist any shocks that may come to it. I think one of the things that have left a lasting impression upon me are all the volunteers that help us week in, week out. I think that's something that I have kind of known at a distance, but I think having done it a lot more intensely over the last year or so, I think the folks that come forward every week to help us with house visits, to help us with a variety of tasks that we have, and really for these folks, it's truly just because they think the system needs to be different, and they have a heart for the folks that we're able to impact the lives of. And I think that to me is one of the most kind of powerful, meaningful things that I'm taking away from my experience with the Workers' Party. I think about the first time I went to a Workers' Party rally in 2006. And I remember going from school, changing out of my school uniform, and arriving at Serangoon Stadium and seeing the throngs of people kind of assembling there, carrying all sorts of paraphernalia. And it was really kind of stark to me. Because remember, this was 2006. And the image that we were being presented generally was one where elections were walkovers, people were generally happy with the way things were. And then to arrive at this stadium and see really a very different image of what might be going on. I think when I think about my experience with the Workers' Party, I think back to 2011 when I first started doing house visits and I first started really getting an insight into the nuts and bolts of what it was like to be involved in opposition politics. And the biggest thing that I remember from that time is how afraid I was, right? I was very afraid to be photographed in a blue shirt. I would always kind of hide behind any camera that I saw pointed our way. And I think that is kind of the fear that many folks go through, even today, kind of coming forward in the opposition. But I think over time, as I was able to build my understanding and my experience with the party, helping out across different areas, whether it be MPS, house visits, policy work, parliamentary work, I think it became very clear to me the meaningful impact that the party was able to create. And that kind of precipitated my willingness or my kind of change from being on the sidelines to kind of sitting in front of you today.